Thank you guys for joining me today. I hope this session can be a little bit of a palate cleanser for anyone who, I just heard Joel over there saying it's been a mind-crushing day. I totally agree. So my intent today is to show you something a little bit different, to think about the subject matter in a little bit of a different way. Before I get started, I should say that I am an employee of Northrop Grumman, and I have represented Northrop Grumman here today, and I will tomorrow in an official capacity. This is not that capacity. I am officially, as of right now, not on the clock. And that was an arrangement that I made with Northrop to present this, because what I'm going to show you today has nothing to do directly with what I do at work. It is something that I do at home because I am a graph nerd at work and at home. So I am excited that Neo4j gave me a chance to present this. We'll see how it goes, but I'm excited to share it with you. So today we're going to talk about an application that I developed to help me write stories. As it happens, this is the reason that I do graphs today. I started out in the graph community thinking about writing, because I was thinking, writing is a really complex thing. There would be this cool structure that might make it easier to model in a database, because I was also a software engineer and I can't keep home and work life separated. So I came up with this brilliant thing that I thought was going to change the world about how you could render any data structure you ever wanted with this situation with nodes and edges. I described it to my dad. He burst my bubble, told me not only did it already exist, but it was a well-established community. So I joined the community. But while I've been exploring graph technology in a professional capacity, I've continued to think about that use case. What could we do to use graphs to author content? So to get started, I wanted to go over three incontrovertible truths, things that I do not think you can argue with. This is the first one. Everyone loves a good story. I don't care who you are, how technical you are, how creative you are. It does not matter. You love a good story. I know you do. And it's really important because in today's modern environment, content is king. Content is everything. The internet runs on content, and all of that is generated. And the effort that goes into generating and maintaining it is astronomical. But with those two facts in mind, there's one more important thing, and that is that writing good quality narratives is really, really challenging. It's difficult to do. And I bet everyone in this room has thought about it. You may or may not have done it. Maybe you have something hidden away in your folders on your home computer, but you have thought about writing something. Everybody does. So it's not easy to do. It's not enough to just want to do it. It takes a lot of active skill and discipline, and a lot of us never really get there. So let me share with you what I think it feels like to start a project, right? You've got this great idea in your head, and you're gonna go sit down and realize that you sit down at the computer, you start typing, and think, okay, that was a great 4 words. No, we'll try this. And you keep doing this, and you don't ever really make any progress. A lot of us fail at page 1. I have a hypothesis about why this is, and that is that every word that you stack after the next word exerts pressure on your next word choice, because there is this expectation between an author and a reader that whatever you're going to read next is going to make sense, it's going to have some logical flow, and some experience is going to be built up. And the further you go, the more you realize that you do not have a plan, and you do not know what the next word should be to create that experience. So maybe your experience is a little bit like this. Yeah, I can work through one sentence. I really can. I can write a page, and I can feel great about that page. And I don't want you to read the words on the page because I will feel embarrassed. So just focus on the infographic here. It's the second page. Maybe you're starting to think, Um, all right, that was okay. Maybe the third page, you start to feel that niggling self-doubt. By the fourth page, you're like, yeah, this isn't working. And page 5, you're going to the fridge to see what there is to eat, right? This happens all the time. So the core thesis, the question I want to ask you today is, do you have to be born as a creative genius to craft a compelling narrative? Now, I wouldn't be here if I thought the answer was no, right? I think the answer is yes, but let's talk about my publishing scorecard for a second. The number of novels I've imagined, 999 plus, they're not really discrete, right? They run into each other, so it's a continuum. I could say they're infinite, especially because I haven't written them. Novels I've started, over 20, different discrete starts to a book. Novels I've abandoned halfway, all but 1 or 2 that I'm currently working on. Novels I will definitely finish one day, clearly all of them. Novels I've technically finished, 3 manuscripts that had enough words in them to count as a book. Novels I've queried to an agent, 1. Novels I got rejected, that same 1. So novels I've sold is 0. However, my sister has been published. So this is what gives me the hope that one day something I write might come to something, because my sister did. So this is her, it's a YA romance, so we might not be in the right demographic for it, but despite it not being in my genre, I'm still super proud of her, and she knows her stuff, right? She got published triple figure book deal, and the 3rd book just came out last month. Bloodleaf, Greythorn, and Ebonwild. So if you don't believe anything I say, just rest assured that someone I know knows what they're talking about. Okay. So let's talk about the relationship between art and science. Why is writing an art? There is an element of plot, pacing, dialogue, and character. There's really more that goes into a story than just these discrete categories, but all of those categories are an art. Right? So my objective with what I'm going to show you today is to take some of those things that are arts and turn them into sciences so that those of us who prefer it that way know where to go, right? So here's what gives me hope. Natural language is an intrinsic graph, right? So we can use our graph powers as graph people to figure this out, right? So take this sentence: Cameron parked his bike and peered into the trees. We could take that sentence and render it as a graph. So I'd like to point out a couple of things. I'm using a hyperedge here where a relationship points to another relationship. Neo4j doesn't model that, but you can do it with a node. So you just use a node with a subject and a target and you get away with it. Turns out to be really useful for modeling natural language. So, Cameron parked his bike and peered into the trees. Great, I have a graph. So what can I do building on that? Well, let's think about the structure of a story. In general, you could think of stories as very complex webs of nonlinear interactions, right? These are graphs. A story tracks what a person wants, what they'll do to get it, and what they have to pay along the way. That is a quote from someone much smarter and more successful than me, John Truby, who is the author of a book that I like very much in how to structure plot, The Anatomy of Story, 22 Steps to Becoming a Master Storyteller. And I do borrow some ideas from him, but we're going to put a graph spin on them. So Truby submits that a really satisfying story, especially in the popular market, is going to have these components: a weakness and need for your main character, a desire, an opponent, a plan to defeat the opponent, some battle, self-realization where the weakness is overcome, and then some new equilibrium. This is what Truby calls the core narrative drive. So doesn't really matter what else you have in your story. If you have a core narrative drive, you stand a chance of telling a good story. right? So we can impose that core narrative drive onto that complex story and say, this is a good story because we start here, we end there, and we're going to have these experiences along the way, and the reason it's a unique story is because the traversal through that complicated graph is going to be new and different, and it's my story. So we can also start layering in subtleties when we think about it this way, right? Maybe you can model a sneaky subplot, which will have some similar plot beats to the main one, but they could diverge and be simpler relatively. Maybe you've got something crazy going on where your timeline's running backwards and you want to keep track of that. This is just an illustration of how a graph model is way better way of outlining a story than just like hitting a bunch of bullets in a row. Ultimately, the narrative path is how you walk these nodes. And something that I think is an interesting realization is that if you author your story as a graph, then when it comes time to tell your story, you're traversing something you already know. You're not making things up. You're not making it hold together. The structure is there. You're just helping people experience it. So in this way, if we think about story structures this way, then we can write things in small pieces and then put them together in ways that are very, very unnatural to authors who don't love graphs. But I'm not one of them, so I like it. So I think by doing this, we can take some of these components, maybe the plot and the pacing of a story, and turn them from an art into a science where as long as you have these pieces, you're going to have something that will make sense, will hold together, and will feel satisfying. Then you can focus on the art, and there is an art, but it makes something that's otherwise intractable into something you can manage. So let's talk about Silky. Silky is my project. It's a side project that I do really as a distraction to avoid actually writing. I tell my sister that I have to write a word processor before I can write a book. But it's a graph-based word processor for nonlinear narrative construction, and I want to show you guys the model, right? So Silky's built on Cytoscape, React, Material UI, Electron. Maybe it wasn't stated here, but I should have. It's so ubiquitous that I didn't even think to put it. It's built on JavaScript, and using React for the UI, Electron to render it as a desktop application. So for any software engineers out there, we could talk about how that works. It's a nice, I really like the pipeline. Obviously, it also has a plugin to Neo4j, right? So you can export your data in there, and I'll show you guys some of that. So the model that I contend is the most useful, so I built it into Silky to help people write content using graphs, is to start with elements, facts, snippets, and threads. So the application is broken into those pieces. So an element would be your nouns. People, places, things. When you're talking about story and story building, maybe we're talking about, world building ideas often get put in here as elements. So it can be concepts as well as actual physical things, right? Facts is it's really the most important one, but it's hard to articulate. So if you're an ontologist, this might mean something to you. Basically, this is my way of tricking authors into thinking about their stories in knowledge models. It's saying, take all of the reveals that you want to share with your reader and boil them down into the smallest pieces you can and make them facts. And then you can control the release of facts throughout your narrative so that there is a constant, measurable, and satisfying output of new revelations, right? What keeps a reader interested in a story are those revelations. So it can be information, details, ultimately they're all reveals, right? And the second to last part is a snippet. So a snippet would be your scene, basically. It's where you put a bunch of actors on a stage, they do a thing, they reveal some information, and then you move on. So the snippet is where you start putting all of the pieces together. You can really think of it as a scene or an event on a timeline. And then ultimately, we land on threads. These are your plots and your subplots. They're made up of snippets, which are made up of elements and facts. And when you put all of those things together, you get narratives. So I'm going to show you an example based on a project I'm working on with some of my friends. It's called the Glad Hollow Nasties. It's actually a video game that we've been working on for a couple of years and haven't ever published because turns out it's a lot of work to write a video game. But the concept of the Glad Hollow Nasties is that you have this village somewhere in the mountains, completely isolated, and they're being terrorized at night by a monster called the Grin that's made out of grave wax, and it comes out of the ground and eats bad people at night. And so everybody is trying to expel wickedness so they can, not attract the wrath of the Grin. Ultimately, it's a survival horror game, but the reason it's a good case study is that in the Glad Hollow Nasties, we wanted a non-linear, and it's because I was involved, a non-linear narrative that would explode in all directions at once, meaning you can't just experience the story like beat by beat by beat. You have to find the pieces and then put the whole thing together. So it's an intrinsic graph. So I use Silky to help myself organize this story and put it together. Our main hero, Hapless Harold, on the left, this is concept art. And then the Grin on the right. This is how we rendered them in 3D. You can judge for yourself how successful we were. But now we'll get into the actual application. So this is a screenshot, already outdated, by the way, for Silky, with the elements on the left, some piece of content in the middle, and then on the right there's a panel where you can see how it relates to other components of the story. And I think this is a video. Yeah, so this is just what I said, right? You got your list view, you've got the actual profile, and the facts, snippets, and threads. So really what you're doing here is just establishing what these things are. This content may or may not end up in your final draft. You can think of it as your wiki, right, for whatever the stuff is you're writing about. You can define what all of these things are, but the panel on the right will show you how that thing relates to other parts in your nonlinear story. So, the next part I want to draw your attention to is the fact. Like I've said before, this is where we get kind of ontological. We have this Elements tab that shows the involved parties, and I've got a couple of layers here because we're gonna change the tab. So we've got fact. So in this case, the fact we're revealing is that Chrysanthemum's corpse saponified into grave wax. So that involves the idea of grave wax, which has some mystical properties in Glad Hollow, and the character Chrysanthemum. So the next example here, Langua runs the Home for Lost Foundlings. She runs an orphanage. So we're revealing that those things exist, right? So just more examples of facts. I think this one's interesting. So another hyper-edge, bonus points if you spotted it. Father Nightingale ordered the draft of Introspection from the Apothecary. It's a hypergraph because we're relating three nodes together, not just one to another, right? So a very complex graph structure, but you can still model it in Neo4j. So now for the idea or the facts tab here, we're on to snippets. For the snippets, you got a scene. This is where you're actually going to write the body of your text. This will probably end up in your narrative, right? This is like a thing that someone's going to experience. So on the right, you plan out all the snippets that you want to include, and you can say who's going to be in them and where, and then ultimately you do the writing in the empty canvas here. So we won't read it again. Like I said, I'd probably be embarrassed if you did. But what I want to point out here is that all of the facts occur somewhere in the snippet. Like it's my job as a writer to deliver or reveal those facts. And we can see that this scene is not actually done because that last fact at the bottom hasn't been integrated. So it's a way to keep track of how far you are and what is still left to do and where the gaps are. So the last thing here is the thread. So the thread is where you put your scenes together and you start making your story. So you can kind of think of crafting a story as building a bunch of threads and then weaving them together to create your satisfying narrative. The nice thing that Silky does, oh, that was supposed to be a video. Yeah, let's let that roll, is that you can move the scenes around, the snippets around, and it will dynamically rearrange them when you're writing. So you can write in a nonlinear way and then move the pieces and then put them back together and still have a product that you can read end to end. Now, as it happens, I'm talking about this as if it only applied to fiction, but it really could be used to create anything, any kind of document that is complex and emergent. It's the kind of thing we could use at work. The only reason we don't is because I want to keep my work life and my home life properly separated, right? But it's an open source project, so if anybody wanted to download it and pull it without my knowledge, you definitely could. So after you've crafted your threads, you can do analyses. See if we can run this. Oh. Go back. All right. I don't know, maybe I dropped the video. That's too bad because this is like the prettiest screen. So when you want to visualize your webs, that's the combination of your threads together. You can look at things like, how do these two plot threads interact? Is time running backwards sometimes? You know, if you have a really complicated plot, it's really difficult to keep all those things together. Once you've crafted the webs or the threads, then you can render the web. Ultimately, because this video isn't working, I'll just cut to the chase here and show that yes, it is a graph, so it can be exported to Neo4j. And from there, you know, that's where the nerds among us, you know, can get really excited. Because suddenly, I can analyze this ridiculous story in terms of influence and importance and, you know, apply some of these graph analysis techniques to really understand what it is that I created. Like, what is the pacing like? You know, what is the rate of reveal of information? As an author and as a data person, I get really excited by that idea, just the thought that I can take it and think about it in this way. So we're almost done here, so I'll try to wrap this up really quickly. What next? Silky has a long way to go, right? I work on it on the weekends. So I'd like to do automatic change impact analysis, like if you decide you want to remove a character, well, what does that do to your narrative? Well, we can track that because we have a digital thread for a novel, right? Timeline management, spatial management, we put a map maker in this sucker. IntelliSense for writers, you know, developers are really good at taking care of themselves. Like they know, they work in the tools that they use to build, so they're really good at figuring out how to make their lives better. Writers are just suffering like they have no idea what they need and they don't have the tools to give them that. So I think, you know, bring some of those design philosophies from an IDE to an author, that's awesome. And I think it opens the door for collaboration in ways that are really difficult right now. Ultimately, what's really next is maybe I'll actually write this book. This is the main project that I'm going to take 1 minute to plug, even though, you know, it probably doesn't amount to anything because I haven't written the book yet. But my current project is a YA or a middle grade novel about a Midwestern United States city or town that gets overrun by visitors from multiple different dimensions, and these 3 kids have to obviously save everybody from imminent disaster. But I'll just end on one closing note and then I'll take some questions. What I'm really hoping I have done today is convinced you that there is power in combining creativity and data sapience. And what I mean by that, by data sapience, is understanding data, how it works, what it looks like, but also having the wisdom to know what to do with it, taking that and using it as a creative tool. When we combine these concepts, we can do some really interesting things. And I think there are a ton of untapped industries. For me personally, for products like Neo4j, like there are audiences out there that we're not even thinking about them. And this is an example of how, with just a little bit of that creativity, we can do some really interesting things. And I guess we have a few minutes for questions. 2 minutes, to be precise.